Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
Day 77, I was hauled off to jail.
And what was so amazing is that the activists really taught themselves how to do this litigation.
Researched it all and wrote letters and asked questions. And
this is our land. We should be a part of the decision making, and that's not happening.
That's who they need to subsidize, the private forest owners.
And they're still doing these clear-cutting techniques that, as we see them in the film, they're just so shocking to think this would be allowed on public land. This is still their strategy. I'm Sarah Fensky. A new documentary looks at how environmental activists stopped commercial logging in the Shawnee National Forest in the 1990s. It shows what happened when environmentalists occupied the forest in southern Illinois. They managed to use their bodies to block the logging equipment and ultimately use new legal strategies to block the clear cutting in court. Activists involved in the Shawnee Showdown managed to stop commercial logging in the forest for 17 years.
So using our bodies was a method that has come from Earth First, which started mainly out in the West. And it's the only tool we had, We didn't have the bulldozers and, all the machines and the heavy trucks and everything. And so it was the only tool we had. So we just thought, well, we'll just sit down in the middle of the logging road, and if they want to come through, they're going to have to go through us. And eventually they did.
They've told me that I can no longer stay in my public land and forest that I own. They've told me that they're going to come in and physically remove me if I don't want to go.
And at some point you just have to, as Edward Abbey had said, draw a line in the sand and say, thus far and no farther.
And that footage comes from a new documentary film telling this history by Cade Bursell. Shawnee Showdown, Keep the Forest Standing, combines archival footage with contemporary interviews to explain what happened and where the forest is today. And joining me now in studio to talk about it is John Wallace. He's an environmental activist who was an organizer during the Shawnee National Forest occupation. And he, of course, is featured in the film Shawnee Showdown. John, welcome.
Thanks, Sarah.
And we're also joined today by Cade Bursell. She's a professor of cinema at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, and the director of Shawnee Showdown, Keep the Forest Standing. Cade, welcome.
Yeah, nice to be here.
So, Cade, give us some context here. What is the Shawnee National Forest?
Oh, my goodness. It's such a beautiful place. It's 289,000 acres. It stretches along 14 counties at the southern part of the state. It consists of mixed forests. You have to come down. That's what I would say. Cypress, tupelo swamps, wetlands, wilderness areas, natural areas. When I first arrived for my job interview, I arrived in St. Louis and I drove south, and it just was so flat. And I thought, oh my goodness, what am I doing? and then I just reached this place which was surrounded by the Shawnee National Forest, and it was just a very, very different environment. It's very hilly. There are a lot of cliffs. The forest is rich in biodiversity. And it's an extraordinary place. And so it makes sense that so many people want to protect it.
Yeah, it comes across so well in this film just how beautiful this place is. And it became such a flashpoint around the year 1990. What made it such a focus of controversy, Cade, at that point?
Well, John probably could speak better to this, but I would say that, and I'll just touch into it and then pass it to John. It was the same period as the Redwood Summer. It was the same period where activists were asking questions about public lands across the country. And so, of course, they were also looking to where they lived. And so protesters here were seeing that the Shawnee National Forest was being hit by clear cut after clear cut across the forest. And so they gathered together. And this place, this one particular place, seemed to be the galvanizing point. It was called the Fairview Timber Sale. And there were protests there. There was an encampment that occurred. And then at the same time, as you mentioned earlier, there was this litigation. And this litigation was key. They fed on each other. You had to have the direct action happening, and you had to draw attention to what was going on. And that's what the direct action and the protests were effectively did. And then the litigation occurred at the same time. And what was so amazing is that the activists really taught themselves how to do this litigation. They went into legal libraries and did the research that needed to happen. I was so impressed by that. I don't even know if I would be able to work my way through all of these documents and learn how to do that. And so these parallel tracks really were impressive. And I thought, when I first arrived here, I didn't know about this story. I was teaching about the Shawnee National Forest, bringing students into the Shawnee National Forest. I began to hear these little pieces of this story, and thought, oh, we really need to preserve this story. It's such an important story to tell. And so I began asking folks if they'd share their stories with me.
And John, that I think brings us to you. This is a forest, and a specific part of the forest, this Fairview area, where you put your body on the line for months on end in 1990. What led so many of you activists to that specific area?
You know, it's amazing. Cade touched on the beauty of the Shawnee. It's a magical place.
Yeah.
And of course, we all had that motivation that the forest was, it's a public place that belongs to all of us, every citizen in the country. And when I learned about the fact that they wanted to clear cut it and that they would lose taxpayer money, all of this, I thought, this is just crazy. Why are we doing this? We have such a little amount of public land in the state of Illinois anyway.
And I want to cut in here. I mean, this is old growth forest, and as becomes clear in the film, they were just cutting this down and it would be turned into like pallets. Like, this wasn't like they had this like master plan to make money off this. The state was losing money.
Yes, and it's continuing to this day.
Yeah.
We subsidize the timber industry to cut our public land. Makes no sense whatsoever. And then to meet these people that were doing the litigation, and I went to a court hearing. It was so impressive. Mm-hmm. You know, they were going up against a bank of U.S. district attorneys, you know, the practiced law professionals. These folks went into the law library in Southern Illinois University and researched it all, and wrote letters and asked questions, and they actually just had an incredible amount of success.
Yeah, they really did.
They really, it was a struggle. It was very difficult. But what an inspiration that was. And I thought, you know, that was a place to draw the line.
Yeah. So, John, you activists who were there on the ground, in all of this archival footage, you guys refer to yourself as Earth First. And this was a big movement out west, kind of a radical environmental group. Were you guys ever officially affiliated, or did you just take that name and you admired what they were doing?
I still am Earth First. I can say proudly. Earth First is not an organization. It's more of a philosophy of treating the Earth first, taking the considerations of Mother Earth into our lives in general, and that movement was very active then.
Yeah,
and we had national support. Other people came from around the country. We had local support. It was amazing when we decided to set up this encampment. The neighbors started bringing us food. One of the neighbors was a water hauler, and he brought us 55-gallon drums, and he would fill up our water drums every so often.
That's a great neighbor to have.
Another neighbor had a pond where we could, go swimming and cool off in the hot summer. I mean, it just wasn't, we realized we were there for the long haul.
Yeah, so this occupation is a remarkable thing. The film really delves into this. I'm going to play a short clip from this. This is Jan Wilder Thomas, who was one of the activists. She was being interviewed by TV journalist Gary Wolfe about this occupation.
So you've been out here how long now?
For 35 days.
Camping out right down here?
Earth First has been maintaining an occupation and a vigil, a 24-hour-a-day vigil for Fairview Woodlands.
Well, let's take a walk down and see
All
where
right.
you've been camping out here. Now, you've renamed this. This was built as a logging road, but you're calling it what?
The people have redesignated it as a hiking
Oh, really?
trail, camping area. It's the highest use of this area for the greatest number of people for the longest amount of time.
And the waiting period that you're here, you've been here for a certain amount of time. You're waiting on a court decision.
Yes, the federal judge is ruling on whether the Forest Service was really illegal when they prepared this sale. That's our contention. That's the documentation that Race has laid out.
So this is where people hang out while they're waiting for the decision. Is that it?
Living room and kitchen.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that is the activist Jan Wilder Thomas, as interviewed in the film Shawnee Showdown, Keep the Forest Standing. We're joined today by the documentary filmmaker Cade Bursell, as well as activist John Wallace, who was there in that encampment. So, John, at that point, you're about at the halfway mark of the occupation. It went on for another month after that. How did they finally end this 79-day standoff?
Well, they brought in law enforcement from around the country, stationed them 24 hours a day at the gate of the timber sale, and many environmentalists, myself included, tried to stop physically the equipment from entering the forest. I used a bicycle lock around my neck and attached it to a log skidder. The U.S. Forest Service used an acetylene torch to cut off part of the log skidder, and I was escorted to jail after that.
And this was your 30th birthday.
It was, and it was day 77 out of a 79-day encampment.
So on your 30th birthday, they haul you off to jail. The other activists held out as long as they can, a couple more days after that until they were finally basically all rounded up.
Well, actually, what eventually happened was we won an injunction, which was why we went there in the first place. So day 77, I was hauled off to jail, and in day 78, the attorney for these plaintiffs that were pro se to begin with, but had a...
Meaning they were their own lawyers.
Exactly. And then the attorney called that was representing them in the appellate court and said, we got the stay. And it took probably another 24 hours for all of the equipment to get out of the forest. So they didn't really log a full day. But, and I'm believing there were maybe 16 arrestees in that process. And so we did actually win this injunction, which gave us a great bit of relief for the time being.
Yeah, and that injunction ended up leading to other really big, good things. And you know what? We're going to have to take a quick break, but we will explore that as we come back from this break. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome back. We are talking about a new documentary film. It's called Shawnee Showdown, Keep the Forest Standing. Details what happened in the summer of 1990 in the Shawnee National Forest in southern Illinois. We're joined today by the director of that film, Cade Bursell, as well as environmental activist John Wallace. I want to get into the legal strategy that ended up really being successful here, even as this occupation, they were trying to bring it to a halt. But I have to ask a question first that came in on Twitter. CD Selzer writes on Twitter, ask John about the Pomona General Store.
The Pomona General Store was an organizing point. The owners of the Pomona General Store, Dr. Joe Glisson and his wife, Jackie Turner, really, they were plaintiffs in the case. It was where everyone went about their concerns. Where we organized. The Pomona General Store was our closest our closest store, so we could get supplies at the encampment. And Joe and Jackie are just were amazing. Unfortunately, Joe Glisson is no longer with us. He was a mentor of mine and just an incredible activist and very motivating source of energy and support. And so they played an important role in this whole process.
Okay, that was sort of the organizing hub there. Well, so as we were talking about right before the break, you were able to get a stay in court, and that basically put a halt to this logging. It ended up turning into basically a 17-year ban. And Cade, you get into this in the film, and legal strategy can be so complicated, but I feel like the film does a good job of just sort of explaining briefly what happened. It was sort of this new legal strategy that they tried.
Yeah, they were going, they started out going after each logging project, and that seemed to be problematic. It wasn't getting anywhere. And so Tom Bushell was on board then. He was from Jenner and Block out of Chicago, and he was working with them pro bono, which was, really terrific. And he was a very committed, he was very committed to the project. And so he decided to go, with everybody, decided to go after the forest plan. And he tells the story in the film about that process, what they thought they needed to do to be successful. And so they also litigated the Migratory Bird Act. And that was the first time that anyone had gone after the Forest Service Plan, or the Migratory Bird Act, and so it was really a groundbreaking case, and they won that, and that's really what brought the 17-year injunction, put the 17-year injunction into place, and then, unfortunately, that injunction was lifted, and currently thousands of acres are currently scheduled to be logged on the Shawnee National Forest, thousands and thousands of acres. So that's really heartbreaking after all that work.
John, thinking about this work and the legal strategy that you took, Cade mentioned that, there was this lawyer working for free who was running point on this case, but that this was something everybody agreed on, that you guys were all sort of a part of deciding where to take this and how to commingle this activism and the fight in the court. We've seen so many movements that end up sort of devolving into squabbling, and it's hard to figure out the direction when you have sort of a diffuse group like this. What made things work for you guys?
It's first of all, it's the forest, the Shawnee Forest. It's unique in of itself, but also a big part of it was the fact that not only was the environment, the forest being damaged, they're losing money.
That was a great argument to make.
And so we had both conservatives and liberals alike that said, this makes no sense. If we're going to sell our timber, well, make money off it. Don't sell it below cost. And that's the problem. Not only are we damaging this incredible ecosystem, we're also throwing our tax dollars away. It's not the Forest Service's forest, nor is it their money. It's our money. It's our forest.
And did you welcome those allies, even if they didn't share your core commitment to environmentalism? They were useful for this argument.
They were, and we did. And that is how campaigns are so successful. And, you know, Cade, so much of what has happened in the Shawnee is groundbreaking. And I think that where we are right now with the logging currently, I mean, Cade is correct. We're facing anywhere between 5,000 and 7,000 acres of logging. Clear-cut style logging is scheduled for the Shawnee. And they're still losing money. Are we going to go through that again?
And they're still doing these clear-cutting techniques that, as we see them in the film, they're just so shocking to think this would be allowed on public land. This is still their strategy?
It is. It is. And I think it comes from the fact that our national forest system rests under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And agriculture produces products. Mm-hmm. You know, that is what this, our great part of our economy is based on. But the problem is they're not subsidizing the growers of the trees. That's what the Department of Agriculture really needs. That's who they need to subsidize, the private forest owners, not selling our trees at below cost. But right now we have a proposal that is, I think it's groundbreaking, and I think we can do it because I think the Shawnee is the place, and I think we can build those bridges like we built in the 1990s, where we can get conservatives and liberals alike to join us.
Tell us what this proposal is.
We have a proposal to transfer the Shawnee National Forest out of the U.S. Department of Agriculture and into the U.S. Department of the Interior and create the Shawnee National Park and Climate Preserve. You know, we have one mechanism on land, on this whole planet, that is the most efficient, the most effective, and the best way to take carbon out of the atmosphere than has ever been discovered. And they do it for free. It's called forests.
Yeah.
And every time these heavy pieces of equipment go into a forest, they destroy the forest's ability to capture, store, and sequester carbon. And they do it for years on end. And so this is our proposal. Let's move it over to the Department of the Interior, have them focus on recreation uses. That is the best use for our forest anyway. And then while that's happening, it helps the wildlife and also sequesters and stores the most amount of carbon and hopefully helps to get us out of this climate emergency that we're facing.
So, Cade, when you first got involved with this story, it sounds like, as you came into your job in Carbondale, you started hearing stories about this amazing history, all this groundbreaking litigation, this amazing standoff, the occupation of the forest. Did you realize at the point that you first started exploring this, wow, there's like some real current issues here that, this wasn't just a victory that happened then. This forest is now at risk all over again.
Well, yes, and I thought that, I think history is instructive, so I think that we could learn from the strategies that were employed in the 80s and 90s. And even though the context has changed, so now we're dealing with climate change, the laws have changed. So the context has changed, but there's still lessons to be learned. And so while that needs to be a story that's preserved, it's also a story that we can learn from. And so that's really important. And I thought that was pretty critical. I also think this proposal is invigorating. It's such an act of futuring and really important to share with people and have them answer the question for themselves. What is the future of public land? What should public land be doing right now, given this context? And it's not a question that we typically ask ourselves. But this is our land. This is public land. And we should be a part of the decision making. And that's not happening with the Forest Service. And we have experiences where we have tried to have dialogue with the Forest Service, and that's failed. So now we have to move in a different direction, and this proposal is a wonderful direction to move in. So the documentary intentionally doesn't provide a solution. It asks the question at the end. I mean, we see John saying, I'm going to struggle and against this logging, but it doesn't say you need to do A, B, and C. It intentionally says and asks the question about, well, what do you think about public land and what's next? And so it's a tool. And after the screening, we typically have a panel of people talking about this new idea, but also asking these questions of the audience because it's meant to create dialogue. And so the panel after the film is critical, I think. And also the photographs that folks have of what's happening on the forest right now, that when you enter a screening, you'll see these beautiful photographs and this installation that's created by Karen Fraley and several other people that tells us, you know, they're examples of the beauty of the Shawnee National Forest juxtaposed against the destruction. And so it really communicates powerfully what we're up against. And then you see the film about this history, and it moves into the current contexts. And then there's the panel that continues the dialogue, because we really need people to be involved. And so this is a way to really begin this conversation with folks.
So if people are interested in becoming more involved or learning more about this, or frankly, just watching the film, we should mention this Friday, that's April 1st at 6:30 p.m., Shawnee Showdown will be screened as part of the Yale Student Film Festival. There's going to be a Zoom panel that takes place at 8 p.m. that features John Wallace, who, of course, is our guest today, as well as others. So you can register to watch this and any other films in this festival for free. We have details about that on our website, stlonair.show. We'll also tweet that out if you look for our Twitter at stlonair, and you can look to join that. That's happening again this Friday. So, John, as Cade mentioned, the history here, this is history that we can learn from. And there's so many things. I found myself jotting notes down and watching what you guys did and how you pulled this off. But I'm wondering what you see as big takeaways for people today who might be engaged in their own environmental fights. Or their own methods of occupation, say, trying to stop the proverbial bulldozers.
And there are many. It is, Cade has, the thing that she has created with the Shawnee Showdown is amazing. It creates a dialogue that we've never been able to create. The big, I guess the big takeaway is don't get discouraged because the powers that be are powerful. And it isn't easy, but keep pushing and be deliberate, and endless pressure, endlessly applied is one of the best recommendations I can have. Don't give up, keep pushing and making those connections. Those people that you think you don't have anything in common with, you very well may have an important thing in common with.
Well, John Wallace, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Sarah.
And Cade Bursell, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
And Cade is a professor of cinema at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. Her new film is Shawnee Showdown, Keep the Forest Standing. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. This episode was produced by Emily Woodbury, with audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr. Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer. St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here. If you learned something new from today's episode, consider leaving us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the easiest way to help people discover our show. We appreciate it. Thank you. St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.